for it. It's 9:02, and as I've told you before, we have a deadline on when we're supposed to finish numbers. It may be a very wishful thing.
Oh,
We may have to
absolutely.
ask for an extension, but we are not going to fail through lack of effort here. So let's try to get started on time. We're going to try and do 3 chapters today. Let me go ahead and pray as we begin. Father God, thank you that your Son has risen from the dead, and that you command that we remember that. You weave into our 365 days a year times of celebration and remembrance. And so we remember today that the Lord is risen. And now, Lord, I pray as we look in Numbers, we will not see this as a disconnected bit of literature that has nothing to do with what we're celebrating today, but in fact is rich in allusion and in background and in preparation for today. It opens just a chapter or two earlier with a celebration of a Passover, which is much of what is the background for what we celebrate today. And so, Lord, open our eyes that we might behold wonderful things from your word. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
The Lord is risen.
Amen.
Good. You're like the 6th time I've said that this morning, and you're the first people that have answered right. I think maybe if it's just like 1 or 2 people, they go, "Oh yeah, cool, good day." But yeah, we're not a liturgical church in that sense, but that is the correct answer. So the Lord is risen indeed. I wasn't here last week. I was out of town. Thank you to Jeff. Jeff's not here right now for covering and picking up. I did not get a chance to view the video from last week, and so if the review that I'm going to give, I'm only going to be about 2 minutes, doesn't match exactly what he covered, put that on me, not on him. He did what he did, and I'm just going to take a guess at it while we try to review very quickly. We'll be in 12 through 14 today. Jeff did 9, 10, and 11, so just a real quick running start, because it is a section in one sense unto itself. In Numbers 9, there was only the second Passover in Israel's history. They had the first one that was actually celebrated in Egypt, the night that the Lord sent the angel of death, and if you didn't have the blood of the lamb on your doorposts, your firstborn son was taken. So they had that Passover. Now they're at Sinai still, and God says, okay, have another Passover. Remember this one and make it part of your ongoing calendar. It was required. What was interesting is that there were people who could not participate because they were unclean, they had touched a dead body, or there was something else that made them ceremonially unable to participate, but they wanted to. And so what's interesting is that the Lord makes provision for those who want to participate, but for some reason can't in the moment. So he said, you can do it again a month from now. But he makes no provision for those who are uninterested or unwilling. If you weren't interested, you just didn't celebrate it and said, well, what's the big deal? You're saying, what's the big deal that the Lord delivered me from slavery? What's the big deal that he's bringing us into the promised land? And the Lord has no patience with that. He says he will cut that person off from the people. So they celebrate the second Passover in Numbers 9. In Numbers 9, we're also told that this cloud that's been covering the tabernacle is how God is going to lead them. And so when are they supposed to break camp? Where are they supposed to go? Where are they supposed to stop and reestablish camp? All of that is going to be done via God's presence in the cloud. He said, I will lead you. I'm with you. I'm staying in a tent, just like you're staying in a tent. When it's time to move our camping spot someplace else, you'll know it because I'll move mine. So they've got that. He's leading them, as we know, into the promised land. And so he is the one they should look to. Where, when, how far, what day, etc. In Numbers 10, verse 11, the people actually leave Sinai. They've been there for over a year now, and just camping in the same spot, and it's actually time now to leave and begin this journey towards a land that God had promised their ancestors. He promised it to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It should only take a couple of weeks. It's not that far. They can get there in less than a month. As you know, it takes them 40 years. And that's what 12, 13, and 14 are going to be about. What happened from, hey, follow this cloud and we'll be there in a couple weeks, to I'll see you in 40 years. It's also interesting, and it's kind of an ominous thing in Numbers 10. Moses approaches his brother-in-law, Hobab. Did Jeff talk about this at all? Hobab?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. What does he ask Hobab to do?
Stay with them. Stay with them.
Be our guide.
Yeah.
Go with us, and so because you know the land, you know where there's going to be water, and you know where there's where it's safe and where the journey. What happened to the Lord's going to lead us? What happened to wherever that pillar of cloud goes? We're going to trust and we're going to follow that. And so there's even kind of a hint in Numbers 10 that Moses isn't thinking very clearly. So before we just kind of see all the things that the people do wrong, why does Moses want Hobab? If in fact God is the one who's going to lead them and guide them through the wilderness and into the promised land. And then finally in Numbers 11, they've started the journey, but the grumbling has also begun as well. It's not the first time they've grumbled, but it's just going to start to unpack a pattern here. They're tired of manna. And I get it, it's been about a year where your diet's been kind of bread and water, so to speak. We don't know what else they had, but we know that they were provided with manna every morning. And it's not an unreasonable thing to say, Lord, could we have some protein? Could we have a little meat with this? And they could have asked for that, and I think that the Lord probably would have answered very graciously. But they didn't ask for that. They sort of demanded it, they grumbled, and they started saying, we had it better back in Egypt. Which is, I remember my grandmother telling me about the good old days and then acknowledging they really weren't that good. They didn't have hot and cold running water in the house. The bathroom was about 50 feet away out in the, I'm old enough to remember visiting the family farm and our relatives' farms up in Wisconsin. It wasn't fun in January when your mom told you to go get ready for bed. And that means walking out in the snow to the outhouse. Those were not the good old days. So Israel's doing the same thing. They're forgetting the beatings. They're forgetting making bricks with no straw. They're forgetting all the hardships. And they're just saying, it's so much better than we had onions, we had vegetables, they gave us fish. And they're forgetting what God had delivered them from. Moses even begins to complain in chapter 11. This was your idea, God, not mine. You really think I can carry all these people? I can feed all these people? I can't do it. God's gracious, and he gives them 70 elders. 70 people, put some of the spirit that was upon Moses on them, and they can help now. So Moses is not carrying this load alone. Garrett.
Just a quick question. Any particular reason why, and I can't remember if Jeff addressed last week or not, that the Lord had taken some of the spirit from Moses and not from himself? Because originally the Lord took spirit from him to put on Moses, but then for the 70 elders that that Moses appointed to help him, he took some of the spirit from Moses, not from the Lord.
Okay, let me look real quick. I want to see the actual, where is it? Hang on. Here we go. It's verse 25 of chapter 11. Then the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him and took some of the spirit that was on him.
I don't think that has to mean that, okay, Moses had 100 units of spirit on him, and God took 70 away and gave each of them one. I think it probably just means the same spirit. And they would not have as much as Moses had. We're going to see that in a minute. The reason Aaron and Miriam get in trouble is that they want to say, he's nobody special. Yes, he is. But I think it's probably just meant to say it would not be a different spirit,
Okay.
but the same.
Would it be a reference back to the garden?
Help me out with that.
Basically where, God formed Adam from the dust, but then from Adam he formed Eve.
Excuse me, let me turn off my Wi-Fi so it doesn't do that anymore. Go. I don't know. I kind of get the broad idea of what you're saying is that there are thematic things that repeat. Before we go too far down there, I would at least say this, is that it wasn't a different spirit, because there are different spirits. You know, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him. There are different spirits in that sense. And I think the idea is Moses is still the lead man in what God is doing, but he is going to have genuine help that will have some of the same abilities and some of the same relationship with the Lord, some of the same spirit, less of, but the same, if you will. Marie.
In verse 17, it says, "And I will come down and talk with you there, and I will take some of the spirit that is on you and put it on them, and they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you may not bear it yourself alone." So I think it's pretty specific that he's taking the spirit from Moses.
I don't see the word from. I will
Well-
take some of the spirit that is on you and give it to, and I don't know.
Oh, okay.
So
All right.
I think
Thank
it just
you.
means.
That's what I
it's-
needed.
It's, you know, if I've got a bunch of 94 octane in my tank, he's gonna put a little 94 octane in their tank as
Uh-huh.
well.
Thank you.
I think that's how to read it. So, good, this is review that was supposed to take 2 minutes, so we won't get too bogged in the details here. And so, the people complain, and he does answer their complaint. You want meat? I'm gonna give you meat. You're gonna eat meat until it comes out your nose, which is kind of a gross picture there. And you gotta ask, when it says it filled the camp to a depth of 2 cubits, which I believe a cubit's 18 inches. So you got 3 foot of quail laying around.
Gross.
Think about that. That's not generosity so much as it's a rebuke. What are you gonna do with the feathers, the entrails, the smell? You've got more meat than you can possibly eat, than you can possibly preserve, instead of wanting to trust that, you know, if they ask in humility and in faith, that they'll maybe get quail the same way they got manna, a little bit of a fresh supply every morning. He says, you really want this? And he gives it to them in a way that clearly is a rebuke, as well as some of the judgment on the people. Jeff, are you just coming in to say hi or sit down, or, oh, okay, very good. I didn't want, I thought maybe there's an announcement or something that, okay, very good. Let's see, where are we here? So I think that'll cover probably for just a very quick review. When we get in now to 12 and 14, we're just sort of continuing on this somewhat downward trajectory. Moses complains, the people complain, and now there's going to be some additional leadership that complains. There's just genuine and general grumbling in the camp. So let's begin with that. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. And they said, "Has the Lord indeed spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us also?" And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, more than all the people who were on the face of the earth. Now we don't know for sure who the Cushite woman is. Generally, people kind of lean towards saying it's probably Zipporah. It could be another wife that Moses had taken. Zipporah is never mentioned again, although she wasn't that far back in the story. But has she passed away? Has she left? We don't really know. It's a little bit tough to make a solid connection between Midian, because we know she's the daughter of the priest of Midian, and Cush. In general, Cush is to the south and slightly to the west of Egypt, modern day Sudan, Ethiopia, that general region. Whereas Midian was basically to the east, on the other side of the Red Sea. And there's one verse that I'm aware of, it's in, I believe, Habakkuk, that kind of conflates the two a little bit, and so there's some connection. It's not a strong connection, so we really don't know. And there's a sense in which it doesn't make much difference. Because the issue is not, is she a Midianite, is she a Cushite, is she the same woman or not? What's the real issue here? Is it that they don't like Moses' wife?
No,
What's the real issue?
they're jealous.
They're jealous.
Mm-hmm.
And you've probably all seen this. that sometimes the issue that's brought up as a complaint isn't the real issue. They're just looking for something. We think you're too big for your britches, Moses. We think that you've taken this leadership thing a little bit too far. Don't we get to lead as well? Isn't the Spirit of God on us as well? Doesn't he speak to us as well? And oh, by the way, in order to make our point, you shouldn't have done that. You know, you should have asked us maybe about who you marry, etc. So that's one that is not a possibility. That's exactly what's going on. They are envious and jealous of Moses, and he apparently is not consulting them with the frequency that they would like. Yeah. Remember that Moses, you know, we think of him as an 80-year-old man. Who is Moses to Miriam?
His younger brother.
His
Her
little
younger
brother,
yeah.
her little brother, yeah. He's the kid in the family, even though he's 80. Miriam's probably in her early 90s at this point. Aaron, we know, is 3 years older than Moses. But this is the youngest person in the family. When else has the youngest brother been despised by the older ones? Joseph. God is doing something unique in Joseph, and instead of the brothers saying, this is so cool, you know, God has promised his seed of the woman to come, and he's going to kind of fix the mess that we've made, and maybe it's our brother. Maybe it's somebody we know in our family. Joseph's brothers are not excited about that. They are so angry they want to kill him. And Moses' family, his older brother and sister, are not so excited about this. They're not going to kill him. The congregation wants to, but his family doesn't. But this is just a direct challenge. Who do you think you are? Is really the question that they're asking. And what's interesting here, we're told the Lord heard it. Is there anything the Lord doesn't hear?
Nope.
So why is this here?
Nope.
This is where you hear the music from Jaws in the background. The Lord heard what they said. This was not a good thing to say, and the Lord's going to hold them accountable for it. And it's also interesting that here we get, I mean, who wrote this?
Moses.
We think.
Yeah.
Right.
We think. This could be a later addition. Ezra might have put it in, and another one of the scribes might have put it in. Because, I mean, by the way, I just want you to know, all of you know, that I am so proud of my humility. You know, it's one of those awkward statements. If Moses wrote that. On the other hand, first off, it's in Scripture. And so if we have an orthodox doctrine about Scripture, it's inspired by God that be there. And so what it really is, whether Moses put it in there, which I would guess that would have been a hard thing for him to do. It actually would have been evidence of humility to write with your own hand, I'm the meekest man on the face of the earth. But by the way, what would have made him so meek? I'm sorry?
Speech.
I can't hear.
I say in speech. Speech
The
impediment.
speech?
Speech impediment.
Could have been a speech impediment.
Coming before the Lord.
Thank you. I think that's probably far more than a speech impediment. I'm sorry?
the Lord.
Oh, coming before the Lord. If you want to understand how not like God you are, be in his presence. One of the wonderful signs of someone who is in the presence of the Lord in a meaningful way is that they're meek. Doesn't mean they're cowardly, doesn't mean that they're timid, but it does mean that they realize that there's a holiness and a power and a goodness out there. In contrast to that, we're dust. It is the kind of meekness that you see in John in Revelation 1. There is the Jesus that he loved, that he was the best friend of on earth. But when you actually see him exalted, glorified, etc., you're on your face. Moses spent more time than anybody face to face with God. And so it would stand to reason that he was the meekest of them, because he had constant reminders of how fallen he was, how fallen human beings were in the face of this holy and this perfect God. But what's interesting, and another evidence for it, that's an accusation that they're making against Moses. Does Moses ever answer the accusation?
No.
Doesn't say a word. But the Lord heard it. And as one of the commentators points out, Miriam and Aaron say, "We hear from the Lord too." Well, they're about to hear from the Lord.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And suddenly, the Lord said to Moses and to Aaron and Miriam, "Come out, you three, to the tent of meeting." And the three of them came out. And the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forward. Do you notice a change here from the previous slide? Look at this one. Look at just the first three words. Now what do you read here?
Yeah.
It started out Miriam and Aaron. And the verb here, spoke, is a feminine verb. Meaning, Aaron's guilty, don't get me wrong, he's there. He's providing moral support and in agreement with Miriam, who appears to be the chief objector. She's the oldest of the children in the family, and she is the one speaking up, saying, "Hey, God speaks to me too." But when God addresses them, he doesn't say Miriam and Aaron, he says Aaron and Miriam. What does that bring to mind?
Adam and Eve.
Garden of Eden, be more
Adam
specific.
and Eve. Adam is supposed to lead.
Who had the conversation?
Adam.
No, Eve. Eve had the conversation
Oh,
with the serpent.
I thought you meant the conversation with God.
No, Eve had the conversation with the serpent, and Adam is just there with her, kind of like Aaron is just there with Miriam. But when God comes on the scene, he doesn't say, "Eve, let's have a talk." He says, "Adam, where are you?" And I think the Lord is once again putting things in the proper order. Aaron, you had some responsibilities here. You know, yes, we get it. It's not that you're going to be sinless and it's all on Miriam, but you have a unique responsibility to think through this and say, is this really the path that we want to take with this? And so he addresses Aaron first, if you will. We need to get that fixed. It's not either that or I need a lighter Bible. Let's see. So this was primarily Miriam's initiative. Aaron had a responsibility probably to stop it. And he said, this is the Lord speaking, "Hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream," like he spoke to Abraham in a dream. And dreams play a large part in the Bible. So God frequently says, if I want to communicate something to somebody, I use dreams or visions to communicate it to them. Not so with my servant Moses. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, and not in riddles, and he beholds the form of the Lord. So, what has he just said? He said that my communication with Moses is utterly unique. I have other prophets. I have people I speak to. Visions, dreams, even riddles. I don't talk that way to Moses. There's some mouth-to-mouth, face-to-face, he beholds my form. We actually talk. He is utterly unique in that sense. Therefore, why weren't you afraid? What do we send to another country? Ambassadors. They're given diplomatic immunity, right? They're supposed to be protected. They're supposed to be honored because they actually represent the king or the president or the leadership or the entire country. So to speak against an ambassador, to treat him poorly or roughly or her poorly or roughly, is really considered an attack on the one who sent them. And that's exactly what God is saying here. I have made this person special. They are the go-between. Moses represents me in talking to you, in giving you the law, in leading you, in judging you, in caring for you. When you speak against him, you speak against me. Why were you not afraid to do this? Darren.
I was just thinking, I just thought Jesus in the parable, when he sends out,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, go good. Develop. Not every.
No, go ahead. I'd say it's
I
just
got to make sure I get the right parable, but he it's the king that I think is renting out. If we're thinking of the same parable, he's renting out his land,
Yeah.
and he begins to send servants to collect the rent, essentially, or tithe of the produce, whatever the arrangement was. And they beat him up and sent him back. And so finally he sends his son, saying, "Don't honor my son." And they don't. They kill him. "This is the heir. Let's kill him and it'll all be ours." And then they say, "What do you think that king's going to do when he comes?" So you're right. When you disregard the representatives, you're disregarding the one who sent them. And God is clearly saying Moses is an absolutely unique representative of me. In fact, I want to make this very practical and down home. 30 years ago, Heidi and I went to a church. I'll let them be anonymous. And they had a philosophy of ministry that they said, we build it on the Moses model. God speaks to Moses. Moses distributes that to the people. And don't you dare question Moses. Their application, God speaks to the lead pastor. The lead pastor distributes that vision to the church and everybody in it, and don't you dare speak against them. To speak against that person is just as bad as what happened here with Moses and Aaron. What's wrong with that? If there's anything wrong.
Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
Jesus.
Jesus is a great answer for just about any question, especially on Easter Sunday.
Yeah.
But well, let's get a little bit more specific.
Does God speak to the preacher face to face and mouth to mouth?
Thank you. Does God speak to the preacher face to face and mouth to mouth? Now, somebody might say, he does. Every morning I get up at 5 in the morning and I'm on my knees with my Bible open and God speaks to me. So they can say that. I understand that. But let's look at a verse that maybe challenges that a little bit. Let's see, did I already? Yeah. Here it is. "And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. None like him for all the signs and wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all his servants and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and all the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel." So, you want to be treated like Moses? Give me some credentials here. Turn this river into blood.
Right.
Turn this staff into a serpent. Do some of the things that God did through Moses, and maybe I'll believe you that you should be treated in exactly the same fashion as Moses. What Scripture is saying, what God is saying here is that, look, this guy is absolutely unique. And I would argue in that sense is a forerunner and a type of Christ. There is going to be one who comes whose authority is so obvious, whose powers are so great that you're kind of crazy if you don't recognize him. But that's not me. It's not Jeff. It's not Darren. It's not any of us. We are not Moses. He is an utterly unique historical character. And so I would just file that away to say God is not leading his church anymore by a Moses. One Moses in history, period, end of story. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. If you want to hear more stories that come out of that, let me know. It has ugly and predictable ends. So, where are we? Verse 10. "When the cloud removed from over the tent, behold, Miriam was leprous, like snow. And Aaron turned towards Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us because we have done foolishly and have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, whose flesh is half eaten away when he comes out of his mother's womb." There's two very interesting interpretations of what God is doing here. What was the original complaint?
The wife of Cushite.
We don't like your wife,
Yeah.
who is a Cushite. We don't have enough evidence to state with certainty what a Cushite or a Midianite, if this was Zipporah, looked like. But the theory is, and I think there's some weight behind it, she would have been quite a bit darker in her complexion than the Hebrews. We don't like the dark woman you married. Wow. And this only John Piper can say this and get away with it. He said, "Oh, you don't like You like white, Miriam? I'll show you white, and makes you leprous. And so it's a rebuke to her nationalism. It's a rebuke to her racism. How dare you criticize someone whose skin is a different color? That's one possibility. And I'm not going to weigh in on it of how likely I think it is. I just thought it was really interesting. Oh, you like a lighter skin color, Miriam? I'll give you a lighter skin color. You're going to be white as snow for a week. The other, and I think this might be slightly more likely, is a kind of nationalism that says because we are descended from Abraham, because we have the law, because we have all the ceremonies, we are clean. She's unclean. Ceremonially unclean, at least. Remember when, and before we dismiss this in any way, 1,400 years later, why doesn't Peter want to go to Cornelius' house?
Unclean.
He's unclean. He's a Gentile. He's from another country. He's not followed all of the ceremonies, etc., to become clean. And what is the most unclean thing that can come upon you? Here, leprosy. Maybe Miriam needs to take the log out of her own eye before she looks at the speck in Miriam's or in
Moses.
Zipporah's or the Cushion's white eye. So it could be a rebuke to a racism. It could be a spiritual pride that God is rebuking and letting Miriam become externally what everyone is.
That might be a little bit too topical, though. This part that gets political. This could just simply be, you're out of here. You're leprous, out of the camp. See you outside. You just removed her from any kind of power or any kind of position, anything. To see you outside, and then maybe hopefully he brings her back there.
That's really interesting and kind of maybe builds a little bit on the general direction of who's clean and who's unclean. Miriam, why don't you experience what it's like to be outside the camp with no authority, with no voice, with no nothing. And then when you marinated in that for 7 days, we'll let you back in. And maybe there'll be some humility, some grace, etc. That's helpful. Thank you. Okay. Where else are we going to be on here? I think that we've done that. I just want to say here, if any of you have ever been looked upon like Miriam looked upon Moses' Cushite wife, I simply want to tell you this: God hears, and God knows, and God knows how to make it right when He chooses. Let's see. And Moses cried to the Lord. Remember, Moses has not spoken. Moses was accused, but he's not spoken. Now he's going to speak. And Moses cried to the Lord, "Oh God, please heal her, please." But the Lord said to Moses, "If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be shamed 7 days? Let her be shut outside the camp 7 days, and after that she may be brought in again." So Miriam was shut outside the camp 7 days, and the people did not set out on the march till Miriam was brought in again. And after that the people set out from Hazeroth and camped in the wilderness of Paran. So the meekest man on earth did not defend himself, but he prayed for those who persecuted him. There's Christ as well. Did not answer Pilate, did not answer Herod, but prayed for those who were persecuting him. Jim Hamilton noted a couple things. He's very, very good biblical scholar. I thought they were interesting. He suggested this story is here in part to show that the grumbling in the camp is a top to bottom issue. It's not like the leadership has it all figured out and they're all doing everything right and it's just these terrible people that they have to lead. No, the people grumbled, Moses grumbled, Aaron and Miriam grumbled. It is a top to bottom sin problem in the camp. And there's, the other thing you noted is just the irony, and I've mentioned this before. Miriam says, "The Lord speaks to us." Yeah, He does. And when he speaks to you as clearly as he speaks to Moses, it is to rebuke you for thinking that there's nothing special about Moses. All right. So, what do you make of Numbers 12? In addition to revealing kind of this top to bottom presence of grumbling in the camp, envy, jealousy, dispute in the camp, in addition to seeing that Miriam and Aaron are a little bit like Joseph's brothers as well, instead of celebrating that God's brought them out of Egypt, sustaining them in the wilderness and leading them into the promised land, they find something to complain about. And I'm glad there's not a mirror right here for me, because I would realize I do exactly the same thing. He's been nothing but gracious to me, and yet I will complain, as you probably will as well. So where are we? I want you to see this. Numbers 11:1, his anger was kindled. 11:10, and the anger of the Lord burned hotly. Numbers 11:33, the anger of the Lord was kindled against the people. And now in 12:9, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, against Aaron and Miriam. The people complained about misfortune, and God was angry. They complained that they have no meat. God is angry. They stuffed their faces with the meat he sent them, and there's not a word of thanksgiving recorded in that, and God is angry. And some of the leadership just said, hey, we want to be more important than you've made us. And God says, I'm angry. In a word, the entire camp is infected with the idea that God's not doing a very good job. He's not feeding us well. He's not leading us well. He's just not caring for us the way he should. And they grumble against God, and God consistently says, I don't like that grumbling.
I just feel like it's not that they see God doing a job not well. They just don't like the way he's doing it. They want to do it his way, or their way. They want God to do it their way, not the way God wants them to do it.
So, Terry says that it's not that he's not doing it well, but he wants you to do it my way. But I would argue a little bit, and you've all been in those committees at work or whatever. Why do you want it done your way? Well, because your way is better. And if only the others could see how much better my way was, we wouldn't have these long meetings. And you've all been in those meetings. So I do understand what you're saying, and that's why if the people had just said, Lord, thank you. Thank you that you feed us every day. You give us our daily bread. I never thought that's really a good allusion to manna, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
You give us our daily bread. Is it possible that we could have some meat or some fish or something to go with it? And I think a gracious God who's a good shepherd would say, of course. If your son asks you for a fish, you don't give him a stone. And so there is, though, implicit in the way they handle it is saying, God, we really don't trust you. You're really not doing things the way we wish you would do them. And so let's take a minute with that, though. Why does the New Testament say don't grumble? For exactly the same reason. When we grumble, we're saying, God, this is your performance review. You're not doing as well as we had hoped you would do better. We're going to give you another year, and we're going to review your performance again. That's what grumbling is. Grumbling is saying things should be different than they are, and since God is omnipotent and omniscient, he's in control of that, and we're not very happy with what he's doing. That's what grumbling is. So don't divorce yourself in your day-to-day life from what's happening in Numbers. When you grumble, when you complain, you just tell yourself, God, you're not doing a very good job. And then choke on those words, because that's not what you want to say. I'm just going to tell you that's what we are saying when we grumble. So where are we? Okay, so that's Moses. That's Miriam and Aaron and their complaint against Moses. The grumbling is a top-to-bottom issue in the camp. God, you're not doing a good job. So now this is interesting. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, every one a chief among them." So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran, according to the command of the Lord, all of the men who were heads of the people of Israel. What's interesting is Deuteronomy 1:22 says the people approached Moses and wanted to spy out the land. And I think that that is probably correct. And this is the Lord saying, listen to the people. Go send the people to spy out the land. Why would the people want to spy out the land?
Because they're worried that
See
it's
what's
not
out
gonna be
there.
right.
They're worried. Is this, and let's unpack that a little bit. What could they be worried about?
Enemies.
But what do you do? What do you do before a hostile takeover in business? How about a cost-benefit analysis? In all seriousness, well, what's it going to cost us to take over this company? What's going to happen to the value of the stock? What's going to happen to, you do an analysis and saying, is it worth it? If you want more street talk, is the juice worth the squeeze? Or is it the other way around? Whatever. Anyway, you're doing a cost-benefit. That's what they want to do. And it's not just, is the land as good as God has promised? That could be part of it. The other is, do we stand a chance in going in? Or are we all going to get slaughtered? Darren?
But isn't it also bottom line saying, I don't necessarily trust God that He's giving us this, He's telling us He's gonna give us the land. We still need to see what's there. We're not just gonna trust Him to.
And I would say that question kind of falls under that umbrella. Do we really trust God? And the two areas that I would say the trust might be weak in is it as good as He says? And do we have a chance of success? Because it could be a really good land, but you're going to get slaughtered trying to take it. Because the people have been there a long time, and big cities and big armies, well trained, have been fighting. You've just been shepherds and slaves and making bricks. They have an army. So there's all sorts of things that they could be doubting in it. And what's interesting, let's see. Yeah. So send them out. Then there's a whole list of names. We won't read the names in the interest of time here. But look at Moses' instructions. Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, go up into the Negev and go up into the hill country and see what the land is, whether the people who dwell in it. Now listen to the things you're supposed to find out. Are they strong or weak? Few or many? Whether the land they dwell in is good or bad? Whether the cities they dwell in are camps, in other words, tents, temporary, or whether they're strongholds. Are they walled cities that will be difficult to attack? And whether the land is rich or poor. Is it really a land flowing with milk and honey? And whether there are trees in it or not, which would be a hugely important resource. That's their construction material, stones and trees. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was the season of the first ripe grapes. So there's a contrast, strong or weak, few or many, good or bad, etc., etc. Why are you asking those questions?
Because you're not sure. You don't.
They're not sure.
They're not trusting that God is providing the best answers in those questions.
And are those not exactly the right questions if you're unsure and if you're doing that cost-benefit analysis? What's it going to cost us to take the land, and is it worth it? God has said, it's worth it. It's a good land. And He said, I will give it to you. What did they just have a year earlier in their history, folks?
Crossing the Red Sea.
And before that, the absolute destruction of a country much mightier than they were. This wasn't like they had to dig out a history book from 400 years earlier and try to imagine what that must have been like. These people lived the miraculous deliverance of God. They've seen the plagues. They've seen the Passover. They've seen the parting of the Red Sea. They've seen the drowning of the Egyptian army. And remember Moses' famous words? The Egyptians you see, you will never see again. I will give you victory and deliver you. That was 13 months ago. And now they're saying, we're not sure the Lord is telling us the truth.
just a quick little thing, I like how it's contrasted basically, where you have Abraham. God said, go. Didn't tell him where, didn't tell him how, and Abraham went.
Yep. Yeah, and Abraham is the father of our faith. Abraham believed the Lord. He followed him, he did what he told. I don't know where I'm going. All I can do is say, God is telling me to go there, I will go there. And here, God is saying, go there, and they're going, can we check it out first and make sure?
They also forgot that God enabled the Egyptians to give them gold and silver and fabrics and goods.
You're going to plunder them.
And yeah, so I mean, yeah, they forgot that the Red Sea parted. They don't see the sea anymore. But don't they look around and see the jewels and the fabrics and the animals and
all the worship
and
items that
all
they,
the stuff?
where they get the gold for?
Yeah.
From the menorah and yeah.
How could they forget about that stuff?
I know.
But that's what worldly
But
does.
I do want to be very careful here. So Maureen asked a great question. How can they forget about that stuff? And now I just want to change one word. How can we forget about that stuff? Because we do.
Oh yeah.
I mean, my heart has that awful, awful tendency. I never say these words, but it's kind of a, what have you done for me lately, Lord?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and why do we have remembrances at Christmas and remembrances at Easter, etc.? Because we need, and why do we do communion? What have you done? Oh, you sent your son.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the thing about grumbling and complaining is you rewrite your history. We talked about that last week. It's like they're rewriting. Oh, in Egypt we had this.
Oh, yeah.
No, you didn't.
Yeah.
You were slaves. So here, they're not seeing all the goodness that God has provided. They're just seeing, hey, you haven't done this for me, or I don't like this, or I don't.
And it's funny because one of the things they say is, the fish was free.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. You had to work 14-hour days making bricks with no straw. That's not free. I got a fish.
But when we read this, we have to think back. We have book, so we know they came out of Egypt with all these different gods. You know, so we have to think. They're probably in confusion. Which God is this?
Sure.
Or which God is that?
And what Joan is saying is, we're kind of used to the idea of, okay, there's a God of the Bible, and they're coming out of Egypt, which had many, many gods,
Right.
and that's
They've
one of the
never
reasons
seen
why the golden
that
calf,
God.
behold
They've
your
never
God,
heard
O
it.
Israel,
Yeah,
who led you,
exactly.
and so yes, there's some confusion, but what I don't want to diminish is that it seems to me God's given them pretty good evidence that he is absolutely unique. He conquered all the gods of Egypt. He conquered Pharaoh. He showed that he can make a distinction. I mean, that's one of the points in Exodus, that in the camp of the Israelites, it says not so much as a dog barked. And so the people are supposed to see this and say, okay, he said he's our God. He said he's going to deliver us. And in our camp, we have absolute peace while they're being destroyed a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do appreciate what you're saying, and we have, and actually Hebrews kind of makes that point, is that we have even better evidence than they did. But I don't want to dumb down the reality of the evidence. They were just delivered in the most miraculous way. It's interesting, the Egyptian history books have a big blank spot in them. Guess where it is? That whole Exodus thing. Who wants to
Plagues.
record how they got their butt kicked by a bunch of slaves, which is how they would have looked at it.
Bruce,
Real
But
do you think it just has something to do with, all the gods that they were used to worshiping in Egypt? That was a physical statue or whatever that they could see. Our God, they can't. It's not something they can physically see.
You
So
know
when
something?
they don't trust, they revert back to what they can see.
I understand that, and I'm in partial agreement with it. I do get that, which is why we were told we walk by faith and not by sight. So let me endorse that first. Let me also say, though, the mountain was quaking, and there was fire on it, and they were so scared that they backed up and said, we don't want to hear the voice of the Lord anymore, Moses. You talk to us. So put yourself again in their place of, at first, exactly like you say, Moses says, they're not going to believe me when he's first called in Exodus 3. I need a name. They're going to say, well, which God sent you? And so you're exactly right. There's that confusion early on. But at what point do you say, okay, I don't know about all these other gods, but I know one God who destroyed Egypt. I know one God who, when we were backed up against the Red Sea, parted it and led us across. And when we're scared to death because we're being chased by the chariots, he drowns all them. I know one God who gives us manna every morning. I know one God who brings water from the rock. And you just go on. I know one God who's camping in the middle of us. So they did have a visual. What a great condescension of God to give them that visual. I am among you. And just so you know, I'm going to not just have a tent, there's going to be a pillar of cloud that just miraculously, strangely hangs over it during day, and a pillar of fire at night. So, yes, I understand. They're used to seeing a carved statue or whatever, but I'm not going to cut them too much slack because I think God made his presence remarkably clearly known. And the issue is they just didn't trust him. And we're going to see that. We need to roll on. We got 6 minutes. We're not finishing in August. Don't tell Jeff I said that. Let's see. So, here's my point. In Numbers 13:1, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel. They're going to spy it out to say, can we do this or not? And God has just said, I'm giving it to you. And I told Abraham I was giving it to him. I told Isaac I was giving it to him. I told Jacob I was giving it to him. I predicted your time in Israel, or your time in slavery rather. I brought you out on schedule. I'm feeding you, carrying you, living among you, leading you. And they're saying, I wonder if we can do this. So they went up and spied out the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehob, near Lebo Hamath. They went up into the Negev and came to Hebron. Ahiman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. I think that's just a little reference there to say these people have been established in the land a long time, because Zoan is the area that the Hebrews were kept in captivity in, and they've been there for 400 years. This is not a new development, so to speak. This is a well-established city that has presumably defended itself against every attack for generations. And they came to the valley of Eshcol and cut down from there a branch with a single cluster of grapes, and they carried it on a pole between two of them. They also brought some pomegranates and figs. That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster that the people of Israel cut down from there. So they've done their reconnaissance, they've been all over, and now they give their report. At the end of 40 days, by the way, Moses is on the mountain for 40 days, and what do the people say? Let's go back to Egypt. The spies are in the land for 40 days. When they come back, what do the people say? Let's go back to Egypt. At the end of 40 days, they returned from spying out the land. And they came to Moses and Aaron and to all the congregation of the people of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, this is the singular him now is going to be probably Moses, we came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit. However, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the Negev. The Hittites, the Jebusites, and the Amorites dwell in the hill country, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the Jordan. Is this a true report?
Yes.
It's true. That is an accurate report. This is what we saw, and they absolutely just lay it out there. This is what we saw. But you can kind of see, they're not just giving a report, they're sort of letting the people know they're everywhere. They're big. We got them over here, we got them over there, they're in the hill country, they're by the sea, they're by the Jordan, they're everywhere. There are multiple peoples long and well established in this land. Now, we're not told immediately how the people respond, but we can infer it from the next verse. But Caleb quieted the people. So apparently the people hear this and they go, oh no. And they are loud, disturbed, crying out, who knows. But he quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go but once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. Now, I don't think it's that Caleb had a different understanding of whether the cities were walled, whether the armies were trained, whether there was lots of people to overcome. Instead, jump ahead a little bit to chapter 14, this is Caleb. If the Lord delights in us, he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land that flows with milk and honey. If the Lord delights in us, he'll give it to us. That's the message. It's not, can our army beat their army? It's not, can our God defeat their gods? That really is the question. It's so on the one hand, Moses sends the man, the people want to go in. We need to see if we have a chance here. And they come back and essentially say we have no chance. And Caleb says, you absolutely have a chance. In fact, you have a certainty. If the Lord delights in us, he will give it to us. The people won't let Caleb go unchallenged. Then the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. So they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy out is a land that devours its inhabitants. Is that true?
No.
No, it's not. It's a good land. It doesn't devour its inhabitants. There's water. It flows with milk and honey. See the grapes? It took 2 men to carry a single cluster of grapes. It is a phenomenal land. But what's the real issue? And all the people we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. We saw that they're much bigger than we are, and they looked down on us and saw that we are much smaller than they are. We know, this is David and Goliath, just acted out on a national scale. We stand no chance against these incredibly big warriors. The last time the sons of Anak, the Nephilim, were mentioned was Genesis 6, where it says they are mighty men of renown. So they have a reputation, they have had for some time. So, Israel's worried. They are not SEAL Team 6. They're a bunch of farmers. So, then all the congregation raised a loud cry, and the people wept that night, and all the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, would that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would that we had died in this wilderness. Why is the Lord bringing us into this land? To fall by the sword? Our wives and our little ones will become prey. Would it not be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to one another, let us choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And we're going to end there, even though I got another 40 slides. Actually, not 30. But we'll pick up there next week because what's going on here? The people still don't have a heart. They still don't have eyes. They still don't have ears. They are an unregenerate people. And they're being led so graciously and kindly and certainly by God, and they can't see it. And in fact, what is the actual accusation here? God is a treacherous God. He didn't bring us out of Egypt to deliver us. He brought us out of Egypt to kill us. That is an amazingly severe accusation against God. And I'm going to give you a little homework here. Go skim through Hebrews. Look particularly at chapters like 3 and 4, I believe, where what's in view is this wilderness generation. And then jump ahead to chapter 6. Chapter 6 is where everybody says, see, you can lose your salvation. Because in the case of those who have once been enlightened, who have tasted the powers of the age to come, etc., and then fallen away, it's impossible to renew them to repentance. And what I want to suggest to you, more than suggest, what I want to argue, is that what Hebrews is talking about is the kind of repentance that these people have. It's not real. They never trusted the Lord. It's why they fell in the wilderness, and it's why they are the examples in Hebrews chapters 3 and 4. God was not pleased with them. They did not enter his rest, etc. And so when you get to that difficult section in chapter 6, he's talking about these people that look at things and say, he only brought us out here to kill us. As opposed, he sent his son to die for us. Caleb Batchelor approached me in the hall this morning, we'll close right now, and just said, hey, can you get to the resurrection from Numbers? And the answer is, yeah, you can. They're worried that they're going to become prey, that they're going to be killed, that they're going to die in the wilderness. And in fact, somebody died in their place and risen again, which is what we will celebrate today. We'll develop that more next week. We're at 10:03. Let me pray and we'll let you guys go. Father God, thank you for stories that don't just have us saying, what were they thinking, but that can easily be applied to ourselves when we say, what are we thinking? I pray that we would look upon what we celebrate today and say we don't need to be doubters like they were in Moses' day. We don't need to be skeptical. We don't need to be concerned about who is it that's going to die because of your plan. They worried that they were going to die because you would turn on them. In reality, you were getting ready to send your son to die, that you might have mercy upon them. Help us to celebrate today, to remember today, with the understanding that while we deserve your anger, we instead receive your favor and your love because of Jesus Christ. It's in his name we pray. Amen.
Okay.